All right, Laura, so to be able to SQL inject, attackers follow a pattern.
Mhm.
Now, you might even call it a methodology. First, an attacker would gather the information that he or she needs before the SQL injection attack. Then, he or she would want to know if there are any SQL injection vulnerabilities. When he knows that there are vulnerabilities, he would launch the attack. If there is a weak authentication, he will definitely use it as the main source of entering the network.
Then he will exploit the authentication rules to inject the malicious code, after which he will try to extract the data as he gets access to the network as a privileged user. He will be able to retrieve sensitive data from the network. Then he will interact with the operating system. He will also try to escalate his privileges so that he can interact even more with the operating system. If he succeeds in this, he can then modify or delete the data or create new accounts as a privileged user. It all depends on what the attacker wants to do.
Right.
The attacker can get on the other associated networks. He can even install Trojans and other malware.
That's right. Yeah. So let's elaborate a little on each of the steps that you just expertly went through. What information do you think an attacker would try to gather? Well, attackers will look for information about the target database, such as, database name, version, users, output, mechanism, DB type, user privilege level, and operating system interaction level.
What next, then? As if that wasn't enough.
Yeah.
He will look for SQL vulnerabilities. How does he do it? He first lists all input fields, hidden fields, and post requests on the website. He will then try to inject code into the input fields to generate an error. He will also try out error-based SQL injection, union-based SQL injection, blind SQL injection, and many more. When he succeeds in the SQL injection attack, he tries to extract table names, column names, and table data from the target database. He may even try to interact with the OS to extract OS details and application passwords. He will try to execute commands, access system files, etc. The attacker can go further to compromise the whole of the network by installing Trojans and planting keyloggers. This is only a brief explanation of what an attacker could gather, do, and of course damage.
Yeah. We just explained what an attacker would do first, but there are some advanced SQL injection steps he could take. Now, before we get into that, let's take a moment here. We'll summarize again what he could do initially. He could gather information from error messages, understand the SQL queries. He could bypass the authentication process through SQL injection, get details about the databases and their objects, and the list goes on. Now, he could even try to grab passwords. With this information in hand, he would try to go to the next level of SQL injection steps.
User IDs and passwords are stored in sysx logins by some databases. An attacker would try to extract these hashes with the help of error messages. He converts the error messages from binary into the hexadecimal format. These converted hashes will be shown as error messages. If the password field requires DBO access with lower privileges, you can still recover usernames and passwords using brute force. Next, the attacker can link the victim SQL server to his machine and transfer victim database.
Right. He can interact with the operating system, really, and this is possible in two ways. Once the attacker enters into the system, he can read or write the system file from the disk itself. He can directly execute the commands via remote shell. These methods are restricted by databases running privileges and permissions, so just to point that out. But an attacker can use the load file function to read and return the contents of a file located within MySQL server into an out file. The out file function within MySQL allows attackers to run a query and dump the results right into the file.
An attacker assesses network connectivity to find out the server name and configuration to understand the network infrastructure. He uses various tools like NetBIOS, ARP, local open ports, NSLOOKUP, ping, FTP, TFTP, SMB, trace routes, etc. All the firewalls and proxies are also tested. Network reconnaissance is used for testing potential vulnerabilities in a network. It is one of the major network attacks and can be reduced to some extent, but can be stopped completely. Attackers use various network mapping tools such as Nmap and Firewalk to determine the vulnerabilities of the network.